these beautiful old-growth forests and are in a terrible state of crisis because, man, they're old and they're dying and they're diseased and they got bugs in there and maybe there's fires have been in there before and, man, insects and, and it's really just crazy because fire has coexisted with the land, insects have coexisted with the land, trees have definitely died and lived again, various, root rots and dwarf mistletoe and other parasites have lived with trees, and yeah, there is more incidence of that. Generally you find it in second growth, generally you find it in disturbed areas where pests have been introduced through fragmentation, through roads. Generally you find it in areas that have been fucked over by forest mismanagement, and yeah, there's more of that. But what's the answer? You gonna cut it all down and make it all a clear cut, and so it can grow up a thick, dense, spindly ass plantation which is totally prone to all of those kind of things? No, you're gonna let it be and hope that the natural controls can take over like they have been. You're gonna hope that the woodpeckers will eat the birds. You're gonna hope that the fire will burn. Yeah, fire will burn, and it will burn, naturally as an underburn. You're gonna hope that fire will clean out the forest of some of those pests. You're gonna hope that, if there's incidents of root rot, that in those areas that species that are not susceptible will for a while take over. But no, what Congress did with the salvage rider was to tack on this bill, this forest destruction bill, onto the annual budget bill, so that it was basically guaranteed to pass. And what this bill did was it suspended environmental laws on areas that were dead, diseased, or dying, so that perfectly healthy old-growth forests could be cut without the environmental appeal process. It was taking the appeal process away from the people, because for a while in some places the people were being effective at stopping sales. So that just teaches you that when you get effective with one tactic, you better be prepared to change your tactics, because they will be too. I think it's not true that young people don't have to feel grieving. I know that with the young activists that I know, most people are feeling the grieving for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is the disillusionment that you find when you encounter the real world and how destructive and cruel and greedy it is. And I think people encounter that in different arenas, but definitely one of them is when you find out what's actually going on in the forest and why it's happening. It's definitely that kind of grieving. It's really hard to figure out what to do with, because it breaks your heart, and the more you love, the more it breaks your heart, and the more places you love, the more times your heart is broken. And it's a constant battle to find that place of being able to function after having your heart broken, and still being able to care after having your heart broken. To be an emancipated minor means that legally it's the same as if you were an adult that is 18, except that you can't vote and do other certain things that 18-year-olds can do. But legally, as far as the court system goes, it means that you're supposed to be held as an adult. However, in my experiences as an emancipated minor, I found that I was almost never treated as an adult. Although I was an emancipated minor at the time of the Warner Creek case, my case was dropped after trial because I was 18. In other situations, I was taken to juvie, let out, really wasn't held in jail. A lot of jails have the policy that they won't hold people under 18 because it's too much of a risk for them and too much of a liability risk that that person would get hurt because of the other inmates. A wonderful Cascadian woman came up to me when she heard that I was doing this interview, and she told me, you know, there's not too many people that got in front of the camera a lot that I would trust to represent me. I didn't really know whether she was condemning me or like commenting, just kind of generally commenting, but getting in front of the media is hard because you're trying to represent such a complex issue in a 15-minute soundbite. And yeah, journalists are not always impartial. The mass media, no matter how concerned or willing to listen to you individual journalists might be, is in general owned by large corporations, many of which have vested interests in certain things. It also caters to an American public with a very short attention span that likes to fixate on violence or absurdities or, you know, like, what are these people doing in the forest, you know? Not that. That's not what they ask. They ask, how do you pee? You know? Like, so a lot of what goes on between activists and the media is the media portraying activists as either freaks that are something kind of like one of those like eyebrow raising weird little notes to your day, or scary terrorists because it sells, or sometimes they'll even, you know, do the victim thing because sometimes it's, you know, in their best interest to show the police brutality or what's going on. But they don't like to give a lot of in-depth coverage of the issues because they're complex and controversial. The society that we live in is very male-centered. It's really bullshit. And along with a lot of the questioning and resisting and other stuff that was going on up at Cascadia Free State, a lot of the women were running into some problems with the fact that men were assuming some of the leadership roles, and there was like kind of sexism going on about, you know, what kind of chores men and women do, and kind of a taking for granted of some of the more domestic caretaking kind of roles that were being taken on largely by women, like, you know, keeping our home, you know, cooking and taking care of people, meeting people, talking to people, cleaning, food prep, and so it kind of started with that. It kind of started with the fact that when there was a meeting and there was strategy being discussed, mostly there was men's voices being heard a lot and a lot louder and listened to a lot more carefully than women's voices. And some of that had to do with the fact that there was, at that time at Warner, there was more men up on the Hill that had been involved in activism for longer than there were women that had been involved in activism for a long time. And I think that some of that also came down to, who was taking the glamorous roles and who was taking the hard grunt work roles. And a lot of the really hard, dedicated day-to-day activism and organizing was being done in town by women who wanted to work on that outreach aspect of it. So women started to speak up about this and challenge this, and as that happened, there became more and more dialogue about sexism and patriarchy. Patriarchy is kind of like just the whole world being created. First of all, Adam was created first, and then Eve was taken from him. First of all, the whole world was created for Adam, and and the whole society being set up to facilitate men and the way that men think and the way that men act and the way that men are physically built. The fact that you can't. Tools are designed for men, and that the corporate media wants to talk to men, and that when your local rednecks are coming up to be violent, they want to interact with the men because that's macho, and that the men are kind of trained and conditioned to compete with other men and compete for leadership with other men rather than looking at what needs to be done, or the people of the community looking at who's good at doing what and deciding who should do it, or the person that feels like they want to do it deciding that they want to do it. It's a lot of times more a matter of who can out macho one another for control or domination, or a lot of patriarchy has to do with power over other people, power to control other people, power to get other people to do what you want, and the kind of power that comes from the assumption of being obeyed, of having your basic needs met and catered to by women, of not being afraid that when you speak up, you're going to be dismissed or not listened to because of your sex. I saw the Warner community transform drastically on the issue of sexism during the Warner campaign and beyond, and some of the ways in which it was confronted, some of them were just really personal and in your face, like, hey man, that's not okay, and what was sometimes felt to be like oversensitivity, because when you hear it every day, you kind of gets to be not oversensitivity, but pushing and pushing and pushing at that one really sensitive place. So there was a lot of direct confrontation, there was a lot of group confrontation, there was a lot of bringing it up in morning circles, there was a lot of signs posted, there was a lot of talk about it, there was a lot of gathering of women to be a strong and powerful block for the support of one another, and and to make our voices heard collectively. And over and all, it definitely changed the community as a whole by making sexism not only obvious but unacceptable socially. When you see that people change, it gives you a lot of hope that other people can change and that other patterns can be broken. And it gives you a lot of, I feel a lot of gratitude for people for being able to go within themselves and look at their patterns of behavior and alter their patterns of behavior. But, on issues like this, I feel like when you change the behavior, you change some of the paradigm, you change some of the thinking. But I think in some ways, you change, it's like you're changing the bigger blocks at first. You're changing the most obvious, the most apparent, and the most changeable, because anyone can think or feel anything, but it's what they say when it's hurtful and destructive that can be, spoken about. So for myself and for others, I still feel a lot of internalized sexism and patriarchy, and I know that it's still there, and I know that even though those behavior patterns have changed, there's still deeper, smaller, harder to get at issues that have to be addressed. To work towards one goal in so many different ways. And that common struggle was really remarkable. That common struggle with the same sense of having the same home place, the same place that you love, the same place that you come to congregate in, and the sense of your community, the people that you love because they are working so very hard, and because you know them so very well. Because when you go through living with people in such intense situations, when you go through potentially life-threatening experiences with people, you get to know them very fast and on a very fundamental level. There's various reasons I was working. I was working because I had a strong support base, mostly, and because we were fortunate in not being busted. And it was also working because it was a very strong and appealing idea. So other places started to adopt the same tactic. At China Left in Southern Oregon, another timber sale, they started the Sucker Creek Free State. And then at Cove Mallard on the Jack Road in Idaho, they started Jack Squat, a free state there. And both of these were road blockades where people lived there and worked to fortify the area and based out of there. When we started to do actions at other places besides the ongoing blockade at border, it was really exciting to be able to experience different forms of activism, different forms of direct action, different locations, working with different groups of people. Part of the Cascadia Forest Defenders mission was to go and work with other groups of people in other areas throughout Cascadia, the Cascadian bioregion, which stretches from Northern California all the way up through the temperate rainforests of British Columbia. And it was exciting to work with these different people in these different locations in Southern Oregon, in Washington, up in Enola Hill. And it was exciting to be able to do something after so much waiting. The main characteristic of those times was constant, action changing from this location to that location, brides going everywhere. I remember, standing there by a car that was going somewhere and being like, oh, should I stay at this action site or go to another action site? And a lot of times it was just a matter of, whim. And at the same time, it was a constant series of heartbreak of going from one place that was being logged to another place that was being logged and never being able to quite stop anything fully. Of, watching the helicopters over Enola and watching Enola get cut. Of, seeing China left after some of the units had been cut. Of knowing they were logging Red 90. And Hoxie. And constantly, you would show up at this place. Sometimes you'd show up at this place you've never been before in your life. If you got lost, you would have no idea where to go or, how to get out of there. And you'd show up at this place, and at the same time when you'd first be meeting it and falling in love with it, you'd be working to defend it and working to try and protect it, while at the same time maybe interacting with loggers and cops